Okay, let's get ready to begin. So welcome everybody to the Merton Clinical Commissioning Group Governing Body meeting. We have apologies for absence from Sam Page and James Murray. We've got no further apologies for the meeting, so we're quorate. We are not expecting an emergency drill, so if the alarm sounds, we must leave the building via one of the emergency exits, which are located there and there. And we have a part 2 private meeting following this part 1, and we will move into another room for that down the corridor. So, I shall open up the meeting with declarations of interest, which is item 2.1 on the agenda. We have that for information. Is that still accurate? And are there any particular conflicts of interest which we need to be made aware of relating to discussions that we're having on the agenda? No, I'll take that as accurate. So we're then asked to approve the minutes of the governing body meeting held on 4th September. So let's go through those page by page, if we may. So the first page, which is page 10 in my pack, page 11, page 12, page 13, 14, and page 15. So that's all the minutes. I'm happy that everyone's happy. I'm going to take those as accurate. Good, I confirm those are an accurate record. And then there aren't any matters arising that I'm aware of that aren't on the agenda, but if anyone has any, flag them now. No? Okay, so let's go straight into section 3 of the agenda. You've got my chair's update, which is verbal. There's only really one thing I wanted to say, and that's slightly stealing something from my managing director's update, which is Josh Potter, this is your last governing body meeting. You're leaving us, but you're not moving too far. So Josh is taking on the Director of Strategy and Transformation role for Croydon, and his last day with us is going to be 14th November, so this is your last governing body. And I think I just wanted to say thank you, Josh, on behalf of the board and on behalf of the CCG for the work that you've done. You took on the job at a difficult time when we were bringing the LDU together. I think you've moved it on tremendously well, and particularly from a Merton perspective, the transformation work and the development work we're doing around integration in Merton is particularly impressive, and I think you've really helped shift that on. So we will miss you, but I think you're leaving it in a good position, and we're really fortunate to have John Atherton going to be stepping into your shoes for the time being to take that on. So we've got someone picking up the reins who knows the Merton system well. So I think you're leaving it in a good state, but we will be sad to see you go, Josh.
It's a quick response. Thank you very much for that. Just to sort of echo that in reverse. I've massively enjoyed the last two and a half years working here. You know, as a Merton resident, it's really heartening working with such a great group of people with such ambition for the borough. So I'm going to miss working here greatly. But as you say, I'm only over the border. I'm sure I'll be spending quite a lot of time in 120 Broadway, so I'll see you all plenty of times. And yeah, thank you for everyone's support. And also just to echo, I'm delighted that John will be taking the role on as well, and that's been massively welcomed by the team. Thank you.
James, over to you for the Managing Director update.
Well, there you go.
Did I steal your thunder?
Indeed, but I got a chance to do it in Wandsworth this morning, so that's okay. I'll take the report as read. The only other thing that I particularly wanted to draw reference to was the NHS England assurance on public and patient involvement. So this is something that we've been working on in Merton for the last couple of years, and we now have an overall green score for PPI from NHS England, with some areas of outstanding practice as well. So I just particularly wanted to thank Julie for your leadership of the team around that, and for the team themselves, because that's been very hard won. And also, I also want to thank Claire Gummett for her leadership of the function, her role as lay member for PPI, and just really to reassure the board that this is something that we are in active conversations about how we continue this good work as we move forward to the CCG merger. So many thanks to all involved. I think that this demonstrates a substantially strengthened PPI function for the CCG, and I think that's a really good foundation when we move into a borough committee of South West London CCG.
Thank you, James. Any questions for James on his update? No. So shall I go straight on to you, Sarah?
Yeah, so I just had a little bit of accountable officer update, which is just very briefly, we are now in Purda. I think we are now in Purda. It's either now or tonight, but we are definitely within. If anyone hadn't noticed, we do have an election coming on the 12th of December. So I'm just advising members of the governing body so that any meetings in public, if we can just think very carefully whether or not that's most appropriate for members of the NHS, and just if you're not sure, then we do have a central communications team who can advise. So please take advice if there's anything that you're not sure about.
Thank you, Sarah. So let's go on then to the section 4 of the agenda, and it's back to you because you're going to talk us through the paper on the South West London CCG merger.
Yes, well, I know that most people are aware, and actually it's been because I don't know if you've noticed, the clinical sponsor for this is Andrew Murray, which makes sense in Merton because he is the chair, but it's been Andrew Murray in every CCG I've been to, which did give the game away a little bit, which is that the chairs, there is a process around the CCG merger in order to elect a designate South West London chair, and Andrew Murray has been successful, has been elected by all of the other chairs in South West London as the designate South West London chair, which means that from the 1st of April, Andrew will become the South West London chair. What that also means is there will be a process to replace Andrew at a Merton Borough level as a chair for the Borough Committee going into the 1st of April. So I thought I'd better say that up front before I talked about the paper, and to congratulate Andrew. And I think all the chairs were very supportive of Andrew as the new South West London chair. I'm sure Merton will be very happy as well for that. Just a little bit of an update of where we are in the merger process. First of all, we did all meet together in common in September to agree all the application documentation to go into NHS England, and that happened. We also had an election process across South West London. Do you want to give the results from Merton to say what the... Or do you want to do it? Yeah.
So I, with support from the team, presided over the votes in both of the locality meetings, and I'm happy to say that the merger application motion was supported unanimously in both East Merton and West Merton.
And can I just thank everybody involved in that, so the team, but also Andrew particularly as chair, and the locality leads that had talked to the membership and made them aware of all the issues that we have and the documentation and so on. And I would just point out that we had, across the whole of South West London, which is around about 280 practices, I think, 16 no votes. So that it was a substantial positive response from the whole of the membership across South West London. So I thought that was worth saying. So we completed all the voting, we submitted our application, and then a few days later we received confirmation from the regulators that we had been supported in our application. Just so you're aware, we did go through an assurance process, and we went along as a team to answer questions. So all of that is now complete, and we are now moving towards implementation. What I'm going to suggest is that we bring back, or we spend most of the January governing body focusing on two areas. One is around what the local borough level arrangements are, and the second part is around the programme plan for the delivery of all the technical parts of the new South West London CCG and how all of that will work. So that's where we'll have the bulk of the conversation, I think, in January. That doesn't mean we won't be having discussions up until then and through seminars, but just that will be the next public opportunity to go through that detailed discussion.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So are there any questions from the board? Are you happy with how that approach is set out and what's going to be coming back to us? Let me just open it up to any questions or comments. I take it as...
Can I just... So one of the things that was suggested this morning actually in Wandsworth, which I thought was very helpful, was the idea that actually as governing body members you all have a great deal of experience of the stuff that the CCG does and the governance arrangements, that we might want to use a seminar before the end of March to do a bit of a gap analysis to make sure we understand what's going to the South West London, what's going to local, and have we missed anything, so that we can take that into consideration as we move forward. So if you would like to do something similar, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think we were looking at the February seminar potentially, weren't we, to do some of that work this morning, so we could do that.
So if Merton were happy to do something similar.
That sounds very sensible. There's nods around the room, so let's say that is what we'll do. James?
Yeah, so just very quickly, just to reconfirm where we are with the local arrangements. So part of what went to the membership for the vote was the terms of reference for the Merton Borough Committee. So those have been through the membership and are part of what has been approved. We will have in the constitution of Merton Borough Committee, and as I've previously talked through here, we anticipate that meeting both in common with the Wandsworth Borough Committee to do a lot of the detailed work around discharging the Borough Committee's functions, because there's quite a lot of detail that we do, but then wherever possible making strategic decisions around service transformation and priorities for services at borough level through Merton Health and Care Together Board, which we will use as a place-based committee in common. So that's the way we're planning to work, trying to move towards as much collaborative decision-making as possible, and Josh's paper in a minute will take us through some of the nuts and bolts of that, but also reflecting the fact that we have a certain strength in our shared arrangements with Wandsworth and looking to keep that going at the same time. With Andrew taking the South West London CCG chair role, obviously we'll be electing a borough committee chair, and they and the locality leads will be the clinical majority on the borough committee for the purpose of decision making. So our decisions about our Merton budget held at borough level will be made by a formally constituted committee, of which the majority will be a clinical majority of local GPs. So that's probably all I wanted to say about that.
Thank you, James. Might be worth me just highlighting, I was asked to pull together some sort of email stroke manifesto to go around the different memberships, having been elected as chair designate. So you should all have received a copy of that, but really just to, or multiple copies of that in some cases, depending on how many different committees you sit on. I've seen it lots of times. I think there were two things that I pulled out in that email relating to what we've learnt from borough-based clinical commissioning groups, what we've gained from those that we want to hold on to. The first was clinical leadership, and I think it's really important that we build and strengthen on that in the new South West London arrangements, and that is what we're modelling. So we're talking about no reduction in the clinical leadership at local level and making sure that all the South West London programmes are clinically led. Certainly the work we're doing through the Senate is to make sure that all clinical change programmes report into the Senate and have a clinical leadership pair supporting managers in delivering those programmes. So for me it's really important that we strengthen that. The second is focus on place, and I think that's a particularly pertinent one for the existing Merton CCG governing body and those of us who will continue in a Merton place-based role going forward. We're really clear in the South West London Constitution and in all the discussions that we've had that there genuinely is a delegation down to place, and that those place-based arrangements must continue to strengthen and be developed. So for Merton, that's the ongoing work through Merton Health and Care Together. And actually the purpose of a South West London CCG is really to support and facilitate some of that local transformation work, as well as doing those things across South West London that boroughs believe can be done best at that level. So I just want you to know that I'm committed to making that happen in the South West London chair role. The other things that I'd flagged up were a real focus to start with as a new CCG on the support required for primary care, particularly around the development of primary care networks, of whom much is expected. But I think we need to temper those expectations with a dose of realism and really put a lot of energy and effort into supporting primary care networks to build their capability quite quickly. The other thing is obviously creating a new South West London CCG. It's really important we set the right culture from the start. I think we've got a really healthy culture here in Merton, and I expect to see that in the new South West London CCG. From working closely with the senior management team, I'm confident we can deliver that. And one of the specific things I'm going to be leading is some work around the workforce race equality standards, so specifically focusing on value-based recruitment, fairness, with particular emphasis on making sure that people from BAME backgrounds in our organisations have all the opportunities that they deserve, and that the particular challenges that they encounter we're mindful to address. So I'm leading some work on that. There's a team who are going to be working on that, but I thought it was important to state that from this point. So hopefully that gives you a flavour of some of the things I'm thinking about as we look towards shaping the new South West London CCG. Any other comments or questions? Claire?
That sounds great. Is it going to be published somewhere so that the public can see that?
Very happy to. Yeah, we can do that after this meeting, so we could put it on our website, on the South West London website.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we go on then to the next item on the agenda, which is system planning?
Thank you. Okay, so I'll just start with a bit of context. So as you're all aware, Merton CCG, in line with the local health and care plan and the long-term plan response, have made a commitment to conducting planning in a collaborative way with our providers and our partners throughout Merton. This slide deck just runs through some of the emerging mechanisms we're going to use to do that, but also talks about some of the risks and challenges we have in doing that over the next few months, in the context of moving from our current governance now through to a new governance from April 1st next year. So I'll start with the planning principles. So these were some principles that we agreed at the Merton Health and Care Together board a few months ago. Now, most of these have been in line with Merton's principles for some time, particularly the first point around professional and clinical leadership. But the ones I've pulled out in bold are the ones where I think we'll see some slight changes in this way of working going forward. So the first one is around a partnership approach. So that moved from bilateral discussions whereby we commission individual providers to provide services and then act as a broker and coordinator of those services together through a single strategy, to one where we are one of many partners working together on a multilateral basis to develop a single strategy and seek to deliver it ourselves. We want to, of course, continue to focus on better value and better quality from the resources for Merton, but where we're doing that and driving savings through that improved quality, we need to make sure that those are genuine savings for the system and they help system sustainability as a whole and they don't move a problem around the system. Partly, you could argue, some of the incentive structures in the NHS as a whole can push us away from that. So the diagram on slide 28 of the pack gives a bit of a description of how we're proposing to do this. So on the top row, we have essentially the three for Merton, groups of work that make up our strategy. So we have the Merton Health and Care Together board and the local health and care plan. We have our acute service redesign programs, so that's the planned care delivery board and the urgent care delivery board. And then we have the South West London Health and Care Partnership plans across that geography. Now, before I go any further, we've talked in the board before about how strong partner, patient and public engagement is fed into all of those plans. The local health and care plan, for example, has been through significant engagement and I think is all the better for it, as has everything else. So, for example, the planned care board, there are patient representatives on that board and playing in throughout some of the work streams underneath it. The combination of all of those things is in essence what has gone into our draft long-term plan response, and as an aside, thank you to all of those who've given me feedback on that so far. And in turn, the first year of that delivery is essentially what we'd normally call commissioning intentions. Now this gets to the bit where I think there's going to be some slightly different processes, because as you will be aware, at the same time as we're doing our planning cycle, many of our partners and particularly our providers have a similar planning cycle themselves. And that leads in providers often to things which tends to be termed cost improvement plans, although I would say many of them are transformational and around improving quality just as they are for us. Others are around base efficiency, paying less for consumables, things like that. What we're proposing to do is to run the combination of all of those plans together through some aligned governance and process to make sure that at the end of it they are a single joint plan. So in particular we're looking to submit qualities impact assessments to that full combined plan, quality impact assessments and benefits realisation, which is essentially shorthand for getting a shared agreement that if we make X or Y change over here, A, B or C impact will happen over there, and not only will it happen, we can demonstrate it's happening and track it throughout the year. That hopefully should then filter through into two things. One is an aligned operating plan, which has a identical view of the world, whether you're looking at it from our perspective or a provider's perspective, and a single quip or savings plan across us and our providers. That then needs to go into contracts because that's how we transact things at the moment in the NHS, and that goes into delivery, and that's where the loop back to those original programmes happens. So Merton Health and Care Together, for example, will be overseeing the delivery of the Merton Health and Care Plan. The Plan Care Delivery Board, which currently chaired by Andrew, will monitor Plan Care delivery and so on and so forth. So the idea is that through this process we develop as unified and single a plan as we possibly can. So in doing that, there are some risks which I think it is worth calling out, partly so the governing body can continue to support and play into this process. So I'll probably just highlight the first three and probably spend the most time on the first one. So this is a very, very different way of working. So the traditional internal market in the NHS has been with us for probably best part of 15 years in various guises, and it has set up to have commissioning organisations commissioning and provider organisations providing. But not only that, that provider organisations provide within the bounds of a contract we award them, and don't necessarily always naturally work with other providers in the same area. Now actually in Merton we've got reasonably good track record over the last few years of breaking down some of those boundaries. So we already have good joint working in place between, for example, CLCH and local authority, for example. We're developing the relationships between mental health and IAP provision with community health services as well. But this is pushing that further. And I think it's just acknowledging that that is a big cultural shift. And whilst most people would agree with that from a a theoretical perspective, and many would do it in practice, it is worth recognising that is going to take some time to bed in. As you say, we're reversing some long-held behaviours. However, the mitigation for that, so a lot of the partnership forms we have essentially building trust right at their core. So I'd say the Merton Health and Care Together programme and board is a really good example of that. We also encourage significant joint working at team level as well. So one example of that might be the way that the children's commissioning team in the CCG works very closely with the children's commissioning team in the local authority. And it's already been recognised in feedback around moving forward together that there's a big OD, organisational development and people piece to moving to a new way of working. The next risk to raise, I sort of referred to right at the beginning, which is we're in a sort of a middle place between existing governance now as it is and how we want to see things work in the future. But we're trying to get there essentially rearranging what we're doing with the same architecture, and that's going to be complicated. So separate boards will have to sign things off, and there will be a certain amount of statutory responsibility overlaid on all of this, and it's just flagging that that may make things take a bit more time and possibly cause confusion. But as I've said before, alignment of some of the key elements of that planning, particularly around quality impact, equalities and the money, should really help that be much smoother than normal. And also there's a really useful forum across South West London called the Contracts Delivery Group, which oversees how this process is happening across South West London and crucially aligns different areas to each other so that one area doesn't inadvertently do something that may have a poor impact on another. And then finally, a big part of this is moving away from a traditional transactional view whereby you have a payment for a bit of activity and that's therefore how you construct some of your investment and saving plans. This needs to focus on system cost and system sustainability. There is no off-the-shelf way of working that out. So in the same way you have a national tariff, you don't have that for costs. And that will differ specialty to specialty, and it requires a lot of detailed work between clinical teams in different organisations and the managerial and technical side who are supporting them. One of the ways we're mitigating that is the benefits realisation group the CCG's had for the last 18 months is now open to provider colleagues, and we're having some slightly different conversations there as a result. And this year's contract has been largely bound up as a block contract, which is made focusing on efficiency and cost as opposed to income and tariff payments, more normal. So we have got a bit of track record this year to go on. So I'll probably stop there at that point. The paper is here to note, but also for discussion. I'm just happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Dagmar.
Yeah, many thanks, Josh. I think it was a really clear and helpful overview. For me, what is in a way missing a bit is the Health and Wellbeing Board, because as you will hear in my next presentation, creating a healthy place is the sort of nest, almost the environment that we need to create so that all our effort that we put into integrated services really comes to best fruition. And I feel that it often gets forgotten, and it is both sides. So if I go back into local authority, we focus on our little orbit, and then I come here and we focus on the health world. And so I think for us as leaders, it is really important if we all stand up for both sides of the coin.
So, thank you. So I totally agree. This paper is meant to advise on process rather than governance. You could draw a very large diagram off the top of this, which would, for example, demonstrate that the Merton Health and Care Together Board reports into the Health and Wellbeing Board on a regular basis. So you're absolutely right. And also that the local health and care plan is a joint plan between agencies. So I've chosen not to repeat those things in this paper for brevity's sake, but it's worth pointing out.
Mike.
Josh, thank you, and I really welcome this move from a transactional relationship to transformation. And I note your point about the OD requirement, and I wondered if much thought had been given to exactly how much, or what that's going to involve, because I think we're in a very different place now. But going forward, I think this is the way that we can actually take costs out of the system by focusing on what's important to all sides.
So I can talk for our own team. So when we entered into a new form of contracting for this year, we did a lot of work with the team internally to talk through the sort of different behaviours we'd expect as a result of working in this way. We've supported teams to spend much more time with provider colleagues. We've had some members of the team going and shadowing provider teams to understand some of the day-to-day pressures and impediments that we've had. I think we've also, I think it's fair to say, Andrew and others may want to comment on this as well. I think we have changed the nature of the debate at some of the programme governance as overseeing some of the programmes. It does feel like it's a genuine move towards a common goal as opposed to a commissioner sort of being assured of progress by provider, but it hasn't always been straightforward, and I think that it plays the risk, as I said before, that as long as the current governance stays the same, there are certain forces pulling people in different ways at times, and I think the main way of getting that is through building those relationships. So whatever OD programme is put in place around moving forward together, I would expect that to include a significant amount of meeting and relationship building between commissioners with provider colleagues as they move into more transformation leaders within the system. I've met with people within the South West London Partnership who are thinking about this, thinking about that OD programme, and I've played in some of our experiences so far in this year. So I can't give you an idea of what the prospectus, if you like, looks like straight away, but I'm absolutely assured from the sort of questions they were asking that they're really looking particularly at the things you're talking about.
Go on, David.
Thank you, Josh. So a couple of comments, really. I think it's a really strong base on which Merton can work, so that the issue in particular around the health and care plan and the work with the local authority, I think that's really strong, so a really strong base here. I think and I recognise that some of this is quite high level and shorthand, but on the diagram, I think the best bit that is not in there but needs to be is also the joint work with other places. So clearly there's some work with Wandsworth around St George's, but there's obviously work with Sutton around the Improving Health Together programme. So again, we know that, but I think it just needs to be, part of what the places will have to do is to work with others as well. And some of that won't always be at a Southwest London level. So that's one. I think the one, and again, that's not specifically mentioned here, but I was at the seminar the other week for audit chairs, and we had the opening speech was given by the chairman of NHS Improvement, and that was particularly around the people plan, which I don't see mentioned here. Now, clearly, that's going to be something which will have to operate at multiple levels. But again, I think as part, when we start to look at delivery and risks and looking at places also where that piece around, delivery of this is highly reliant, isn't it, on the people within the system, within that place. So I think, again, just having some reference in here that along as, because we mention always, don't we, around priorities, budgets, but also increasingly it's going to be about where are the people to deliver that, both in terms of the skills as well as the numbers. So again, I'm sure it's, you won't have forgotten about it, but I just think it needs to be said somewhere.
Sarah?
So I think that's absolutely right. Workforce is one of our key priorities going forwards, and we have a South West London Enabler work stream on workforce. And Dido Harding, who's the chair of NHS Improvement, is the champion currently of the National People's Plan. So, and I think we recognise in the NHS that it's one of our biggest challenges is how we actually achieve the level of workforce that's required for the future, and the change in workforce as well. So I think it's about this, but I think it's more about what's the overarching plan for how we deliver the People's Plan, which is one part, but workforce generally, which there might be a local nuance to that sits outside of the national plan. So I think workforce is a key priority. I think it does need to be reflected in everything we do, so I think it's really helpful.
Josh, let me ask you something which is about the first risk, and specifically the commissioner-provider relationship. So you talk about it requiring a significant cultural shift, or representing a significant cultural shift, and I think that's absolutely right. So my question is, do we know where the provider boards are on this? Are we confident they're cited on this, that they own this? Because it's going to be really important that tone is set from the top. And I guess I'm just thinking about what's the role of us as a governing body in supporting this, and is there anything we may or may not want to do with provider boards? I know it's a funny time to be asking that question when we're talking about merging CCGs into one, but what's our thinking around that?
So, well, I can give you my thinking about that rather than a corporate hour, if you don't mind. So I think it's always a good thing for the two boards, between this board and our provider boards, to spend as much time together as possible. Most are a significant number of board members from CLCH, St George's, etc., South West and St George's, come to many of the partnership meetings that we're talking about here. Similarly, as we've moved into a more system way of working, we've had system oversight meetings where we've together presented our views on the health and progress of the system as a whole, which I think is really positive. I think my own reflection, though, is that because everyone is still a sovereign organisation, there is still a certain amount of pulling. There's a natural pull back to individual institutions at times. I think I couldn't honestly say that I've never done that myself either, because at the moment we always have our particular roles in the system. I think it just goes through more and more communication, reinforcing the point. Certainly, corporally, everybody recognises this is the way to go. That message is filtering down more and more to the teams within some of the organisations. It's not gone far enough yet, absolutely, but I think there is an opportunity as we move forward with MFT to do some of that further OD together. If that answers your question.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things is the impact of this on individual organisations might worsen their individual position. So if we do this properly, the provider cost improvement plans might look quite different and their scope might be more limited than is currently the case, which might negatively impact how their organisation performs if you take it as a single organisation outside of the context of the system. So I guess the people working on these plans need some cover from their board to know that they're going to get support when stuff gets tricky in working through this.
Yeah, well, a big part of the response to the long-term plan is going to be squaring that circle in exactly that way. So I think the idea of your single control total and system control totals removes some of that concern to begin with. But it goes back to the fact that for the last significant number of years, it's been operating under a very, very different regime, and so therefore it will take some work to get right.
Anything else for Josh on this? No. So we're being asked to note and consider the report. Look, yes, I think we've done that. Okay, everyone happy? Thank you very much, Josh. That's really helpful. So let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the annual public health report. Over to you, Dagmar.
Yeah. So thank you for giving me the time. As you will be aware, I've got a statutory duty to produce an independent annual public health report. One doesn't always know whether that's a good thing or quite a hard thing. But what is really important is that I'm trying to do with my annual public health reports is not choosing any fancy, esoteric thing, but something that complements what we are doing. And so for this year, I've chosen tackling diabetes, and it was quite funny when I walked in. Tim said, oh, you know, Dagmar's telling us about diabetes. No, how would I dare, you know, with the experts around the table. What we tried to do as a complement is to produce our learning and key messages around what a whole system approach about tackling diabetes would look like in a format that is really accessible and that we can share very widely. Not just with experts like you all around the table, but with our voluntary sector and indeed our public. And so the idea is that the report doesn't just stand on its own and is any erudite new research. It is key messages around our learning, and it really complements the work that the Health and Wellbeing Board has done, and a significant partner, obviously, the NHS, on tackling diabetes. And just, obviously, I've given you the summary and the highlights of both the annual public health report as well as the action plan. So the key messages, they aren't new, but they do get forgotten. So we all know that diabetes is a horrible problem. You see it daily in your practice. We also know that the root causes really aren't that people are greedier or lazier. Diet and physical activity play a huge role, but it is not the people, it is the conditions that we have created. And we as Health and Wellbeing Board have buddied up, all of us with people with diabetes, for 3 months to walk in the shoes. And honestly, the experience, particularly for the non-clinicians, was quite sobering. You know it all, but doing the right thing is a completely different ball game. And so therefore, the message of a whole system approach is that it is partnership. It cannot be done by one partner at a time. And for me, and that's why I commented on Josh and the system, it has to go hand in hand that we are creating a healthy place and the holistic services. So on holistic services, I think this governing body in particular has been absolutely exemplary. I sit next to Mohan. So people with diabetes have loads more needs than just their blood sugar, and the social prescribing that is now happening is really covering holistic needs. We've got the IAPT for people with physical illness. These are huge improvements, and the patients are really, really appreciating that. But actually, the services are embedded, and it was so telling from some of our buddies. They say they come out of the hospital from the clinic with their prescription, and they had a chat with the dietitian, and then they want a snack, and then the only thing that is in the vending machine is some horrible food. How can they? Or they step off the bus and Mitcham High Street, the food offer is terrible. It is unaffordable, and the choice is poor. So unless we do it hand in hand, we are not reaping the full benefit. So these are the really key messages. We know them all. We now have to live them. And the third one was really, we haven't got all the recipes up our sleeves, so we have to learn as we go along. And I'm really quite delighted. If you look in the report, there's a little cube, and it shows you that then as a partnership, we really try to put our learning into practice. So on the right-hand side, you actually see, well, what has the council now done around creating a more healthy place? And you might think these are small things, but the leader has signed up with me to the Sugar Smart campaign, so that means in our school meal contracts now, there's a much healthier option. The hardest bit for me, I can tell you, was to get through the advertising standards aligned with TfL, because that means income for the council or potential risk to income for the council. I had to fight for this really hard, but that has gone through, so hopefully the unhelpful advertising of crap food, particularly in bus shelters where school kids are, will disappear, and tell me if you still see them. And lots of work is going on around air quality, and now the recent declaration of a climate emergency. These are not necessarily monetary values, but this is political leadership that is absolutely essential if you want to create a healthy place. And I think it was then really complemented by the CCG with the excellent work on the social prescribing, on the IAPT, and then obviously in terms of investment, the primary care local incentive scheme. So for me, this is a really great example that we should celebrate how we've worked hand in glove between healthy place and holistic care. And if I look in the future, because that's what we've talked today, I'm really delighted to see what's happening at South West London level with diabetes, from good to great. Ronnie, Imran, our James Blythe, they are going to Yale. It's all about diabetes. It's now empowering patients, digital solutions. I am so delighted that the seeds that we've put in are flowering. And the Health and Wellbeing Board has just recently agreed its ongoing priorities for action. And what we've agreed is that we're not taking our foot off the pedal of diabetes. It was our priority last year. We want to continue, because one of the challenges we have as well is that our attention span is so short, we get bored. You know, 1 year we do diabetes, then we say that's now finished, when we've only just really started. So as a Health and Wellbeing Board, this year we want to learn, how do you keep momentum? Because it hasn't all gone away. And all of you, I hope, can help with that. And then in terms of learning, there are other long-term conditions. The Clinical Senate has particularly looked, for example, at respiratory, and some of the learning that we've done around diabetes, I hope that we can then apply to other problems. So I recommend the report to you, and please use it widely with your constituencies.
So Dagmar, before I open it up more broadly for comments and questions, I just wanted to commend the work you've done on this, because I do think it's a really great piece of work, and you've been relentless in pushing this and encouraging all of us in the system, particularly your colleagues in the council, to take this seriously. And I think I want to just commend the council as well, broadly, for being receptive to this, and actually for taking some quite brave decisions to try and do the right thing for people in Merton. And it's just so encouraging when you look at that cube. That's genuinely what a system response to a problem looks like. So really thank you for the work you've done. I think it's really exemplary. Claire.
I second that. It's a great report. It's very easy to read, very straightforward. There are a couple of things there that I'd really like a little bit more information about. The work that's been done with the Tamil and African Caribbean communities, and also that schools neighbourhood approach pilot. Can you just give us a little bit more on those?
So if I start with the SNAP, it is an initiative where we've volunteered to be one of the London boroughs for a pilot, where the idea is that we look at a 400-metre diameter around a school to pull together all the different council responsibilities for that place and space. And it's very interesting. Obviously, what we're looking at is air pollution. But what we're also looking at is advertising. We're also looking at cyclability, walkability. But it's very interesting because what we've done is we walked with the kids and the parents in the perimeter. And what you find out is also what worries parents is safety. And so what we do is we then pull an action plan together that is owned by the schools, the pupils, and the parents. And it has brought people from the council together that normally haven't talked together, again practicing a sort of a mini whole system approach, and the learning is shared with Public Health England to roll it out. That's the SNAP, and the work with the Tamil and Afro-Caribbean communities. Afro-Caribbean, we have a very good relationship, and obviously because of their higher risk of diabetes and complications, particularly like stroke, we've worked very closely with them. We have to admit that with the Tamil community, it wasn't very easy, and I think James can chip in because some of our initial buddying approaches with members from the Tamil community were guarded, to say at the least. Some didn't work, which really made us learn to say, be humble. Who are you that you think you can just march into a community and know it all? So we're now having setting up a whole network of people that have experience. MVSC is running a project with community groups to deepen the learning and continue the work, because it's really in its infancy.
It was really just echoing the impact in primary care we've had with the Liz, and just putting it in the forefront of our minds. The work we've done with meeting with other members of other practices to discuss difficult cases, the searches we're running through our computer systems to identify those most at risk. I've actually been quite surprised how many people you pull out of those searches, and we have discovered, because it's at the forefront of your mind, who you'd never expect to be diabetic or even at risk of diabetes. You know, thin people who are exercising, who are well, not the classic stereotype. So it's clearly a disease that spreads throughout the ages, colours, creeds, and sexes, and I'm really interested to see how we get on with the National Diabetic Prevention Programme, how many more people we can get from Merton going through that, and the advice we can partake. But it's a huge task, and well done, and hopefully we can contribute the bit from primary care.
Anything else? No. So we're being asked to consider and champion the recommendations. It sounds like there's general enthusiasm for that. I'm certainly keen that we do champion the recommendations, because it's not your plan. This was something that you really did engage us all with, Dagmar, so I think we all feel like we own it, certainly those of us who've been on the Health and Wellbeing Board. So I'm very happy to say that the board is going to do just that. So thank you. Right, let's go on to item 5.1, which is the finance report. Neil.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. So just to say, this report is for the period up to the end of September, and as the previous report is a shortened version of the report that goes to the Finance Committee, where it will get the appropriate scrutiny and challenge. I think the key headlines to take away at the moment are that we're still on track to achieve the balance, financial balance. However, the risks have not really subsided, and if anything, they've actually increased, which I'll come on to shortly. So there's no significant changes in our forecast from the previous months. So this means acute contracts continue to be at a run rate above where we'd like them to be, and it's predominantly around some of the planned care linked to RTT in particular. There's now been an issue around prescribing where we've been told for a national formula for the price of drugs that could be in the region of around £100,000 per month or upwards. At the moment, that is an estimate because we're only looking at the July data at the moment, but that will come in from August. So what we've obviously doing, this is a national issue, not just something that would necessarily affect Merton or South West London. So I suspect if similar CCGs are seeing these issues, that there will be some pressure put towards the centre. The good news is that CHC seems to have stabilised, so the forecast that we came up with 2 or 3 months ago has remained in place and hasn't deteriorated. So if you just look at the risk and mitigation table on page 52, you'll see on the left-hand side it's predominantly stayed the same. There's been some small movements around that. Then on the right-hand side, which is then picking up the additional risks, you'll see on there the CAT-M that's on there. That's the prescribing issue that we've seen coming through. And on the acute line, that's the London Ambulance Service, which we finally got the contract signed off in the last couple of weeks, but that has meant a deterioration in the acute position. We had to sign off at a slightly higher number. There are a series of mitigations in place that we've got in there. To note on this, you'll see it's an unmitigated risk at the moment of around 650,000. We do have a recovery plan in place, so there's a lot of work that is actually going on around that at the moment, but we've obviously got to go further to ensure that Merton achieves its targets come the end of the financial year. So I think in summary, it's clearly a very difficult position that we're in at the moment. I think the good news is we do have some mitigations in place, and we've got the recovery plan. We've got all the governance processes within the CCG that we're utilising to ensure absolute focus is maintained on that. However, we're probably going to have to still go further just to make sure that we land the right side of the line. So I'm happy to pick up any questions if anybody's got any.
Anything you wanted to say, David?
I mean, clearly, we've had the Finance Committee the other week. We've had the South West London Committee as well. So we've had that. I think the point around the recovery plan, because the last time we met, we hadn't seen any detail. There is now some more detail, and it's that we need to now have further discussions with the team on, because the team have been working really well over the last couple of weeks to pull it together. But the committee, we haven't had a chance to have a look at that. So I think we clearly need to take that way and give that level of scrutiny. I guess in many respects, we're always used to seeing, aren't we, the acute overperformance, continuing care. We've talked about that before. So in a way, those aren't new to us. The prescribing one is, and I know that's one where James Murray has taken it up with NHS London on that, because that is an issue that's affecting every single CCG. Now, there is a risk around that. I mean, we're clearly hoping that somehow that can be resolved at a national level and it'll be funded. Otherwise, there is a level of financial risk for us, which is very new, which is new to us. You know, it's completely come out of the blue. So, but you know, we're going to have to manage it. So I'm happy with the report as such. But as I say, we need to take away the recovery plan and do more scrutiny on it.
Any questions and comments from other members of the board? Obviously, this is something that we're scrutinising quite heavily at Finance Committee at the moment. Claire?
It's just a question about, on slide 48, it talks about 27.1 thousand for GP at hand. Can you just explain that?
Yes, so this is, so GP at hand is a practice that's opened up in northwest London. So there's been a significant number of newly registered patients at GP at hand. What NHS England London region have done is undertaken some scrutiny around the healthcare resource consumed by those patients that are being registered, because predominantly they are resident within Merton, Wandsworth, etc., but probably work in the city. So they're probably accessing local services, and at the moment North West London becomes the responsible commissioner for those patients. So they're having to make an assessment as to just how much healthcare resource they're consuming. And at the moment, what that's basically saying is that we've had £271,000 taken off us to pay to North West London for those patients. Now, just to flag, that is moving monthly. So some CCGs it's going up. For Merton, actually, it's come slightly down from the original estimate. So at the moment, it's a moving feast, and I guess at some point we need NHS England to say, that's it for this year, and then we can move on. So just to flag, that is a risk, but at the moment, a relatively small risk for Merton.
Any other questions? So this is for information. Obviously, as David indicated, it's going to have further scrutiny. Particularly, we're going to have the opportunity to further scrutinise the recovery plan, which we will do. But thank you for that, Neil. Let's go straight on then to the governing body performance report.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll take the overall report as read, and it's here for information, but there were 3 areas that I wanted to pick up, then happy to answer questions on those or other parts of the report. The first is the A&E position. So the intensive support team, NHS Emergency Care Intensive Support Team, be doing an extensive piece of work with St George's over the past few weeks, looking in 3 parts really at the emergency flow at St George's, the main tooting site and the way in which patients flow around the services there, the ambulance handover process, and then a wider piece around the community services, local authority and mental health provision beyond St George's. Much of that work has now concluded, and this is giving us a very helpful set of recommendations and actions to undertake ahead of winter. So the first 2 parts of that report, the processes around the St George's site and the LAS handovers, were received at the end of October, and the Trust and Commissioners are now working through those high priority recommendations and feeding that into some of the wider winter planning work to ensure that performance remains as strong as possible going into the winter. The Trust has also established now a weekly emergency care delivery board, which the Chief Exec chairs, which looks at various things, but including workforce, the way in which the various specialties respond to the pressures in ED, the long length of stay patients, and how they work to make sure patients who have mental health issues within the department are cared for appropriately and within the 4-hour standard. So that work is largely complete in terms of the external review, and it's back with us now and the Trust in terms of responding to that as part of the winter plan. So performance deteriorated slightly in September, went down 1%, but I think we're very hopeful that the insights that report gives and effectively the marginal gain recommendations get us into a place of mutual understanding of those issues ahead of winter. The second point I wanted to pick up is the RTT position. So the Queen Mary site at St George's began reporting again in September, so now St George's is fully reporting their waiting times as a trust. They remain broadly on track. They're just 0.5% off where they should be, so 85% against the 85.5% position, and they're still very confident of achieving the 88% of patients within 18 weeks by the end of the year, which is very positive. And the 52-week wait position is one over plan. They had 6 patients at the end of August waiting over 52 weeks instead of 5, but again, they remain confident of getting down to 0 by the end of October. So I think good news in the sense that they are mostly on plan, and that the mid-September recommencement of reporting for the QMH site went well, and initial reports on data quality, etc., show that there are no immediate issues for the trust. And the final point I wanted to make, we talked many times in this governing body about the problems with the IAP service. I'm pleased to report that for the second month running, the position has been above target for access rates, recovery rates and waiting times. So we are confident that with those 2 months and the provisional position we've seen for October, yet to be published, that the problems that we've had with the IAP service in its legacy provider and then in its transition have now largely been resolved. There is one remaining issue which falls outside of the national metrics, which is the wait for second and subsequent treatment. And along with some other areas in southwest London which have a similar issue, we are continuing to resolve that. And we are expecting at the next contract meeting a plan from the Trust which looks at opportunities to bring forward the average wait times that people wait for their to start their second and subsequent treatments. But not to detract from the overall very positive message that against the metrics that we are required to report on for IAP, we're now green across the board for the second consecutive month. I'll pause there, happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, John. And can you just remind us, is this the version that's been through the Integrated Governance and Quality Committee?
This has, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So those board members who are on that committee have already had a chance to scrutinise the performance report. Yeah. So, shall I open it up to questions and comments? Tim?
Hi, John. Sorry, you were talking about the difference between the first treatment and second treatment, and whether that first treatment is a sort of triage or assessment tool to then work out when actual sort of series of CBT therapies might start, and then obviously building that relationship with the counsellor and hopefully helping manage the problem. Is that first treatment genuinely a first treatment, that first with their designated counsellor? Because I know sometimes it's a bit difficult to isolate the difference between a treatment and a triage, really, which is often what that first one has been badged at. So are we satisfied that is genuinely the treatment is starting? And I'm not sure it feels like that as a practitioner at the moment with regard to waiting times and how quickly my patients are being seen. And I slightly look at my colleagues because I don't want to, I can think of 2 or 3 in my own world, but that could be a biased view of something like this. But is there still a sense from practitioners on the ground that those delays are still there in the day-to-day? Because my feeling is, but it's great to hear that we're making some progress.
Andrew, you're the clinical lead for mental health, so over to you.
So I guess from 2 perspectives. I think as a practitioner, I'm seeing that people are reporting anecdotally that those waiting times are less. I've noticed that the last few weeks, which was positive. And then we had the meeting this morning where we were actually looking at the latest data from IAPT, and there were some real positives there. So the median wait now from that first to second treatment episode now is 12.1 weeks. So it was 3 months. It was 5 months. But I think that's very positive. And that benchmarks well with a lot of services. The other thing to note is for August and September, the access rates were above what we're expecting. So we're getting the numbers of people through the service, and the recovery rates of the service for August and September were 61% and 56%, which are excellent. So the target is 50%. So I think the service is working well. I think we have to remember the spectrum of offering for that service and not just focus on one narrow aspect of that services. There are a lot of other services like the digital offering that is virtually near immediate access. Group offerings are there, so I think it's just being aware of that holistic nature of the service, including well-being.
Andrew, do you want to expand a bit on then what that first treatment comprises? So if someone's waiting 12 weeks I think you said between
1 and 2.
first treatment
Yes.
and
Yeah.
second treatment.
Yeah.
I think you're meaning then between first appointment and second appointment. Are they undergoing any therapy that isn't face-to-face in that interim 12-week period?
No, there is a way. I think an important aspect of that first treatment is that very thorough assessment, making an accurate diagnosis so that the subsequent management plan is then very appropriate. And looking at the recovery rates, it looks like the service is doing that well, because we're seeing really, really excellent recovery rates. So I think a large part of that initial treatment is ensuring that someone is on that correct pathway.
John, if I just sort of pick up on that, I just bang on about this. It sounds odd to be satisfied that there is a 3-month wait for someone who is suffering from mental illness, and it's what is our acceptability on it in the sense of a quality perspective, because I know that we end up seeing a lot of these people sort of in between these periods, and it's how could we aim to improve that to get people on that? So I agree that the spectrum of offering is much bigger, but it still seems a long time.
So James or Julie, you both look like you want to come in here.
I think what I wanted to say is the work that we need to do with them is risk assessing how they make that assessment in the first place. So is someone safe to wait 12 weeks? And if they're not, what's in place in the meantime? And they will have policies which look at that. We did that with the previous provider. So I think we are at the stage, if someone's waiting 12 weeks, we need to know that their assessments that are taking place are appropriate, that that person is in a fit enough state of mind to wait 12 weeks, and if not, what's their, what do they do, what else do they put in place? It may be a phone call, it may be, other therapies that might be available in a different way whilst they're waiting for that appointment. But I do think we need to just ask that question, because what we don't know is whether anyone's coming to harm in those 12 weeks while they're waiting for that second. I'm sure that they've got procedures in place to cover that, but I think we probably need to ask the question.
So I think we have, and I think we can just make sure that we close the loop on that. I think the other thing so I've chaired a number of escalation meetings, which we've now stood down around getting the access rates where they need to be, and they have confirmed to us that they do clinically audit that first treatment stroke assessment to make sure that there is some form of therapeutic intervention. I think the clinical threshold for it feeling like an intervention and the patient-reported threshold for it feeling like an intervention might be quite different. I do think that, so while I don't feel that we should rest on our laurels at 12 weeks away for interface-to-face counselling, I am equally very mindful of the fact that as we push towards 25% access rates from the comorbid population, well, from the population with anxiety and depression, that we have to be pragmatic about the proportion of people within 25% of about 16%. So we're talking about 4% of the population every year going into this service. The percentage of that will be able to access face-to-face counselling realistically is going to be quite low. And we're going to have to rely on digital and group offers just because of the available workforce. So I think that we have to get it down. Equally, we have to continue that work to manage patient expectations and also manage the pathway into the service, so that the people who are getting into that pathway and are possibly facing that slightly longer wait are the people who really clinically need that one-to-one face-to-face intervention, and that we're supporting people to access the other channels within the uplift offer. So more to do, positive, more to do, but equally it's got to be from both ends. It's got to be from the expectation management as well as from the generating the capacity.
So there's 3 other of my GP colleagues who want to come in on this. So let's start with you, Karen.
I'd agree with James. I think the key to this is around managing expectations, and I think that applies to GPs as well as to their patients. I think communication is key, that we did do some communications a while ago, and actually if the waiting time has come down a little bit, I think we should be updating that with GPs. It should be a live and dynamic thing, so that GPs really do understand what the waiting time is likely to be when they refer a patient or advise a patient to self-refer. And I think as GPs we have to accept that while the waits are as they are, that we do need to provide those additional support to people while they're waiting to be seen. And also equally from the trust perspective, I'd expect that there would be an easy two-way dialogue, so that we could go back and raise concerns if we were more concerned about people. So although it's not ideal, I think it's manageable, but I think the key is around communication, so that GPs understand that you think you've referred someone, they're going to be seen next week. Clearly they're not, and as long as all our colleagues understand that, I'm sure that they can help patients while they're waiting to get get their treatment underway. I think that's the situation as it is, and that's what we have to do.
Mohan?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think certainly the wait times coming down is reassuring to see. I'd be more worried if they were going the other way. Social prescribing has been across 12 practices in Merton. It's going to some of the practices which haven't got it, and there's a real opportunity there. And obviously some of the other practices which haven't got it, you can offload a lot of these mental health patients who actually have real social need, and that's their root cause. So actually I'd really deplore if you can sort of embrace that when it does come to lots of other practices which haven't got it, and use it as a real option, because some practices are really not sure how to use it, but I think if they can use it for this, that will help bring the wait times down while they're waiting for therapy. So that would be my addition.
Thank you, Mohan. Marek?
So when I was preparing for today's governing body meeting and reading the paperwork, I must admit I was reflecting upon where we were before. And this is a huge sea change, whereas previously issues to do with IAPT and so on were really ones for huge concern. This does appear to be a significant sea change. Having said that, at the coalface, it doesn't necessarily quite feel that way, because indeed patients are still sort of saying that they're having to wait a long time for their treatment. And I think the people who have preceded me have already said that a lot of this will be around managing expectations. But I'd absolutely agree with the fact that it needs to be managing expectations based on current circumstances and not those of 12 months ago. So I think we need to be able to say to patients, there is a waiting time for this. Having said that, the service is being provided well. It seems to be leading to good results. Therefore, it is worth waiting for this service. Mohan stole my thunder a little bit, perhaps. Perhaps not surprising, bearing in mind his role. But also at the coalface, I can't stress how valuable social prescribing has been. Not necessarily to siphon off these people, but actually because it genuinely provides them with options that ultimately resolve the mental health problems with which they've come, which are very frequently anxiety related due to social isolation or inability to access other forms of support that they would have otherwise get. So I think it's probably a duality here of management, a holistic approach that's been really helpful. So I'm delighted to see the written bits. I'm looking forward to feeling it on a more day-to-day basis. But I just say well done to everybody involved. And hopefully in a year's time it'll all be green and fantastic.
Andrew, it was just to champion Mohan and the social prescribers. There certainly is a PCN lead in working with the networks. You know, actually the social prescribing has leapt ahead with trying to get these staff in, and we're really looking forward to next month, starting more in the West practices, getting our social prescribers. So well done, Mo, because actually really pushed that agenda on, and but yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Okay, so if I can sum up then, really good work on improving our performance against targets on IAP. That sounds like that's going definitely in the right direction. I think you're hearing a strong push though to not let up on that, and perhaps a push to be thinking about the waiting time for second treatment and aiming for a similar target on that as we're set as a formal target on access to first treatment. If we're feeling that the first treatment is more of an assessment than an actual treatment, we should probably be setting ourselves our own internal goal of making the waiting time for the second treatment the same as the national target on first treatment, if that makes sense. Because I think this is about getting the right quality of service for patients as well as hitting the targets, and it sounds like you're on that, but a little bit more work to be done.
It's really helpful to hear those reflections. I think just briefly to respond, we are now waiting for the paper which the Trust are in the process of producing, and was discussed at the final escalation meeting we held with them this week. And I think absolutely we need to make sure that first encounter continues to have a sufficient therapeutic element as well as the triage, but also critically that both for Merton and Wandsworth and Sutton, where these issues are also present, that we reduce significantly the wait for the second treatment, and with those other options, the digital offer, etc., forming part of the way in which we can do that.
Josh?
Can I just add one thing? So I absolutely agree with the aspiration you're talking about. However, I wouldn't want people to leave this discussion thinking that everybody who seeks support from Merton Uplift has to wait for 3 months for that support to come in. We're talking about one part of the offer, of which there are 5, 6, 7 different elements, some of which, as Andy said, are almost instantaneously available and have proven to be extremely impactful. And I can say that from friends and family who've been through some of those things themselves. It's a good service that is able to cater to a lot of different people with different needs. I agree absolutely clearly we need to continue to focus on the one-to-one waits.
Thank you, Josh. That's a really helpful perspective. And talking about patient stories, I know someone gave me a story this week about having had really quick access to therapy through Merton Uplift, and they were really positive about it. So, yeah, it's helpful to get that broader view of things. Anything else, Claire?
This is something completely different. But I just noticed the learning disabilities, the proportion of people with learning disabilities on the GP register receiving an annual health check. In the last quarter, it's dropped quite considerably. So just for us to be really aware of that and keep an eye on that.
Just to respond briefly, absolutely. At IGQC, we took a paper, I think the last meeting or the meeting before.
Sorry, I wasn't at that. So
No. But we do recognise that there are some points that fall outside of some of the sort of key areas of focus, and this was one of those areas where we took a separate paper setting out a proposal around how we would address this.
If I may just respond to Claire, that part of this may also simply be the cyclical nature of work within an annual context. It may well be that a far greater proportion of these annual health checks are done, for example, in quarter 4 than they would be necessarily in quarter 1. So just to be aware of that.
Thank you. And Katie?
So I was going to reflect exactly the same thing. However, the target is high and that we do have quite a significant gap that we know we need to meet even once we get to year end, and actually the quarterly totals have added together. So we are working on that.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. That was for information again. I think that was a useful discussion. So let's go straight on to the reports from committees. So these are just summarised minutes that you've got for information. So having had those, was there any questions that people had arising from the minutes that you've got? No? Okay, that's the final item on the agenda. So I'll just open it up to any questions we've got from the public gallery, ideally related to discussions that we've had in the meeting today. Okay. Sandra.
I've got a couple of questions actually. You were talking at the start of the meeting about amalgamating the CCGs. Phrases that we used were things like service transformation, a significant change, and a significant cultural shift. These are significant changes. They are a major change in the way you're planning to deliver services. Given that, do you not feel that you should, as I believe you should, consult the Practitioners Council on these significant changes you're proposing?
So where we were talking about some of the change, and particularly cultural shift, that conversation was actually in relation to the change in the way we're contracting with our providers. So that was about our system planning, not specifically about the CCG merger. In terms of the CCG merger, I don't think for any of us in our existing 6 individual CCGs it feels like a really substantial change, because it's just a progression of the way we've been working for quite some time. We have had an overarching commissioning structure called the South West London Commissioning Alliance, working across the 6 CCGs for a number of years, and we've got used to doing a lot of business together. What the merger does is starts to formalise some of that arrangement, and in fact it doesn't have any impact on the services we commission. Where we're looking to make efficiencies is all around the running costs that we incur as 6 separate CCGs. So there is a national ask to reduce the running cost so the cost of running CCGs by 20%, and that's for every CCG in the country. What we have worked out is if we merge the 6 CCGs, we can take that 20% cost out of some of the areas of duplication, such as having multiple governing bodies. And what we can do is preserve the money that we spend in terms of running costs on services where we're actually commissioning services on the ground and working in partnership with local organisations to improve the quality of services for patients. So it seems to be a really sensible step for us to take, which is why there was an overwhelming vote in favour for that from our member practices, because of course CCGs are membership organisations, so the decision to merge the CCGs was taken by our member practices themselves. I think it's worth highlighting as well that what we're talking about is only savings around the running cost aspect of what CCGs spend, which was a very small amount of our total budget, because the majority of what we spend is on commissioning services for patients. So it's a very small amount of our total budget that we're considering. Obviously, the impact on an individual CCG, though, is still quite significant, and if we weren't planning on bringing some of the functions together.
But it's not only that, is it? You are changing the ways that you're commissioning services too. For instance, you're going to pay for whole year costs rather than individual costs. You're going to make all sorts of significant changes. And it's evident from the discussions I've witnessed here month after month that you consider it a significant change. You've described it as such. Therefore, I think this is a significant change that ought to go to public and council consultation. And I'm not alone in that. Groups across the country have been saying this to CCGs, that this is something that needs to be consulted on.
So we've already been through the assurance process and have this signed off by our regulators based on the engagement that we have done with groups including local authorities. We don't believe it has any significant change to services. What it will do is change the way we work, but actually we were already doing that as a number of CCGs together. So none of the items that you mentioned I don't think will have changed because of the merger. What it will do is make efficiency savings within the administrative kind of back office functions of CCGs, which is all for the better for patients because it frees up money for frontline services.
Well, I'd agree to differ, but okay. My next question. As I understand it, under the Sustainability and Transformation Plans, CCGs, trusts and councils were supposed to work together to devise plans to save money, as set up in 2015. Now, here we are, CCGs about to go to consultation on their plan on acute services to downgrade 2 local hospitals. Councils have been having scrutiny committee meetings for a number of years now where they're supposed to be looking at the plans, and yet you've not published them either to the councils or to the public. How can the councils have been scrutinising your plans, because you haven't given details about beds, about provision, about anything really? And how can the public take a view when you are still refusing to publish any details of your plan? Given that, for instance, the Trust did publish quite a lot of detail when they were running the plan, you are not publishing your details. Why not, and when will you?
So there's a huge amount of information on the Improving Healthcare Together website, as you are aware. We're happy for the public to go and have a look at that. We're not yet in consultation. We won't be in consultation until PERDA has finished. So there will be an opportunity for the public to see the detail of the plans at that point.
When are the councils going to be given the opportunity to scrutinise your plans? They have joint health overview and scrutiny committees, and you're giving them nothing to scrutinise.
So the scrutiny committees, we have spoken to the JOSC about all of the work that we are doing. They again have access to the level of detail that the public has access to, and they are supporting our plan to go to consultation when we go to consultation, which we haven't yet.
Let me just add to that, Sandra. So up to now, what the scrutiny committee's been able to do is scrutinise the process that we've been through. When we are able and ready to take a decision to launch a public consultation, it's at that point that we will publish everything with all the detail that we have and all the working that we've done to come up with that detailed planning. And that's an opportunity for us to listen to what the public have to say, to hear their thoughts, their concerns, their ideas. And it's an opportunity for the public to properly read and understand the plans and the thinking we've done behind that, and then to give us their thoughts on it, because it is a consultation process. It's going to be a listening exercise, and what we will do then is take all that feedback and incorporate it into our thinking so that we can make the best decision we can about the future of Epsom St Helier. So we look forward to being in that phase, but as you know, we're not there yet.
Can I just say that any plans that you come up with, as the trust plans, was a huge document with a lot of detail, took a lot of understanding, a lot for the layperson or even a professional to get their head round. You are proposing to go to consultation at the same time as you publish your plans. So therefore your first consultations that you hold, no one will have had the opportunity to read and understand your plans. I think that the councils and the public deserve the details of your plan before you go to consultation so that they can read, understand and absorb what you're planning. The first lots of people you will consult with will have no idea of the detail. You should publish it well in advance and the council should have an opportunity to scrutinise those plans. For instance, I'm asking you now, how many acute beds do you propose to have in each of the three options? It's a very basic question that we have not been given an answer to. Why not?
There's lots of information on the IHT website, as I have said. That's been shared with the public. That's available to the public, and the full detail will be available when we go to consultation.
Is that basic information on the website? How many beds are you proposing?
All the information isn't on the website because we're not yet at a point of going out to consultation. It's really important that we plan the consultation properly. In answer to your challenge, Sandra, about presenting the public with information too much too quickly and then asking for a response before they've had time to digest it, we are going to be planning the consultation very carefully. We're not going to be just dumping documents on people and expecting them to respond. We're going to have a whole range of different ways that we're going to engage with members of the public, and we will have material in all sorts of different forms, so in much more accessible format for people who want to look at it at that level, whilst making available the detailed working for those who want to properly scrutinise all the working that we've done. But we're not in a position to discuss that now for two reasons. One is we are not yet ready to go out to consultation and we're in PERDA. So what we can say in public at the moment around a contentious issue like that as people representing the NHS is extremely limited, as I'm sure you appreciate.
Am I right in thinking that the councils were supposed to have been a party to STP plan making? Am I right in that? If I'm right, why haven't you given them even the bare details of your plan? Like how many beds you propose?
So the local health and care plan for South West London is a joint plan with all of our partners. We're currently working, it's built on the local health and care plans within each borough, which is jointly owned by all of the partners, including local authorities. We've had really positive feedback from the public and from our partners about the way in which we have plans together across South West London. We hope to be able to publish those plans soon, and we're currently working with partners just to work through all the detail of those.
You haven't answered my question. Were local councils supposed to be a part of the making of these plans?
So I'll just confirm again that the local councils were a part of the making of those plans. They are full partners in our local health and care plans. They are full partners in the health and care plan for South West London, which we hope to publish shortly.
Do they know how many acute beds you plan to have in each of the three options? You're not answering my question.
Well, Sandra, there's two separate things you're talking about. One is the overarching plan for our South West London system, which has lots of different elements to it. The second thing, though, is the specific planning around improving healthcare together, and the detail of that has not yet been made public. So councils have not yet had the opportunity to scrutinise it, because we will be making that information public when we launch the consultation.
Were they not supposed to be part of the plan making?
So the local authorities have been heavily involved in the overarching system plan in terms of the planning around improving healthcare together. Where councils have been specifically involved is looking at the needs of the population to inform the thinking that we've done up to this point in time, and they've been very helpful in giving us information about the local populations for whom we're planning any change. James?
I mean, it might just be worth referencing that if you look at the Merton Health and Wellbeing Board, which is chaired by and has significant local authority representation, you will see that the Merton part of the South West London overall strategy has had extensive council involvement, and that's our Merton Health and Care Together plan. I think the question that you're asking specifically relates to the Improving Healthcare Together element, which is a very specific part of the overall South West plan and is subject to the restrictions that Andrew's talked about. But to directly answer your question, has Merton Council been involved in the part of the South West London strategy that relates to borough-based services in Merton? Yes, and you can see it through the Health and Wellbeing Board, and it's called the Merton Health and Care Together plan, and that is what's reflected in the South West London 5-year strategy that is under development.
The South West London strategy that I saw, the major plank of that was reducing the number of acute hospitals in South West London.
So Sandra...
Could it be finished, please? From 5 down to 4 or 3. That was a major plank of the STP, which I thought you had to talk to the councils about. I go to the oversight and scrutiny committees and I see the councils asking very limited questions and there is no detail available to them. And I was at the last one where they asked for more detail and they were told they can't have it.
So I think, Sandra, we can have more dialogue about this in a different setting, but not in our public governing body meeting. But I will allow Sarah to come back on that final point, because I think it's quite easy to respond to that, because I think what you're referring to is a previous version of our South West London plan.
So the original STP plan that was refreshed in November 2000, and I'm going to get the year right, 17, where what we said was we are not planning, so that was the original plan said they were looking at reducing the number of acute hospitals. The refreshed plan that was published in November 2017 very clearly stated that we need all of our hospitals in South West London, but that we had a specific issue around sustainability at Epsom St Helier. Hence we were starting the IHT programme, which is the programme you've been talking about. So that has changed from the initial plan, and then our refreshed new plan that we're working on now is the development of the local health and care plans at a borough level.
Your refreshed plan
Sandra, I'm afraid I'm going to have to close this down because it really isn't questions relating to what we've been discussing on the agenda. We are going to have plenty of opportunity to talk about improving healthcare together when we've got through the election period, when PERDA is ended, and if and when the CCGs take a decision to go out to consultation. Not at all. So I'm afraid I'm going to move on to I'm going to move on to any other business, because we really I've given plenty of time for questions. The date of the next meeting is Wednesday the 8th of January, and I'm going to close our part 1 meeting because we do have to move on to part 2 because we've got some important things to discuss in the next phase. So thank you everyone for your time.